Cool. Well, thanks, Paul, and thanks, Courtney and Kieran, for inviting me on. Yeah, so when I was asked to do this, kind of took a step back and thought about my own journey through architecture, and it was a good chance to reflect on kind of common themes and threads that have came out since, back in kind of school times. And I guess these are really looking at social outreach as architects, continued mentoring within the architecture industry, and how these impact and influence my own work within the education sector. So if we take it right back to the beginning, school years, I was in a very fortunate position that I got to experience firsthand the impact of a new school building. Oh, getting a bit of feedback there. Is that okay there? Just getting a bit of feedback.
Everybody, just mute your microphones, please.
That should be us there. Yeah, so I was quite lucky that I had first-hand experience of the benefits of a new school building back in the day. So originally, as you may have guessed, I'm from just outside Glasgow, a town called Coatbridge, which is kind of east end of Glasgow. The top two images here are the original school building, St Andrews High. It was an old Victorian building, pretty dilapidated, damp everywhere. There was kind of ad hoc prefab units added as and when needed, no sports facilities, no sports teams because of the lack of facilities in there. And between, I think it was third year and fourth year, we moved into a new shiny school building designed by Holmes Miller, who were a firm in Glasgow. And just to give an illustration of the kind of quantifiable difference in attainment that gave to the pupils, I've got older brothers and sisters who are 4 or 5 years older than me. In the previous building, same staff, same curriculum, same issues around tuition fees, which are obviously free in Scotland, so shouldn't be that much of an issue. Out of a cohort of about 120 in the year group, I think in my brother's year, only 5 actually moved on and went into higher education. And my sister's year, that maybe jumped up to about 6 or 7. But when you compare it to my experience in the new school buildings, that jumped up to about 30. And talking to staff, I know some teachers there who I still bump into occasionally when I go back and visit family, and they always mention, the increase in behaviour, the increase in pride and sense of community, and also the addition of the sports pitches. Our school produced multiple professional footballers, which would never have happened if we were still in our old Victorian shackle of a building there. But I guess the key moment in this whole exercise of moving from one to the next was the architects from Holmes Miller came out to the school and visited us and gave a series of some presentations and career talks. And I didn't know any architects growing up. I didn't really think about it as a career path or a career choice. But listening to those presentations, you hear them talk about the design process and what architecture is and what it could be. It kind of made you realise it's a bit of an amalgamation of everything that I enjoyed doing when I was young at school. Art, science, maths. It was that real meeting point of what is quite a confusing situation when you enjoy that variety of subjects. But kind of reflecting on it now, it's, I'm obviously very thankful and lucky that I had that opportunity, but it was definitely a luck of the draw. It was right time at the right place. If I'd been there 2 or 3 years earlier, 2 or 3 years later, I wouldn't have had those talks. I wouldn't have got to experience what an architect could be, and I might not have been here today. I think the key thing in that is the architect who came out to visit us. We actually, once I told them I was interested in becoming an architect and studying architecture, we kept in contact regularly, maybe spoke once every couple of years. And whenever it came to applying to university, like I said, our school wasn't really set up for architectural applications. It's quite a unique process of portfolio building, interview preparation, the whole lot. But he thankfully took a bit of time out in the run up to application time, and he helped me, curate my portfolio, prepare me for interview questions, what might come up, what might not come up, and applied and successfully got into the Glasgow School of Art. I would say again, reflecting back on this, probably went to university a bit too early. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the school set up in Scotland, but we do hires instead of A-levels, and you can actually do all your equivalent A-levels in the 1 year. So I went to university when I was 17, just turned 17, and I think it was just too early. I wasn't mature enough, didn't really get it. And I'd say in the first 1 maybe first year and second year at university, felt completely out of my depth, didn't really know what was going on, and it was pretty touch and go for a while there. But thankfully, the summer between second and third year, I went to another architectural practice, just applied and thought I'll get in a summer internship because, it was really kind of touch and go. Is this going to be the right thing for me? So I wanted to get that professional experience to see what it was like in the real world. And that pretty much changed everything. We struck up another mentoring relationship in that architectural practice. We continued our kind of discussions through third year at university and through part one and then on to part two. And, really good sounding board for projects, really good sounding board for advice, for crits, how to prepare, how to answer. And it was really a game changer. And that was just through that continued mentoring that I had at that kind of early stage of my kind of architectural journey. Contrastingly from my previous experience in school, you've got the positive experience of a big event. The Macintosh building fire happened during my part 1 year out. And you don't think about it too much at the time, but again, on reflection, there was a real noticeable difference in the atmosphere, the way the different subjects teached, the kind of community feel of the whole school. If anyone's familiar with the Glasgow School of Art, you'll know that all the different subjects, architecture, fine arts, sculpture, product design, interior design, they're all housed within about a 10-minute walk of each other. And with the building fire, you basically had the fine artists, the sculptors, the people that you liked, interacting with in the communal workshop at the other end of the city. So that whole community feel had just gone. And now, working in the education sector, we talk a lot about heart spaces in communities and heart spaces within campuses or heart spaces within schools. And I think sometimes the architecture can just pay a bit of lip service to that. But in reality, this was a heart space of the campus, and it disappeared for the second half of my studies, and you did actually notice it. So that's something that we always try and maintain. And, I think that personal experience really helps you realise the importance of these spaces and, what they contribute to the education experience. So after finishing part two, I started working at Nor Architects in Glasgow. And again, I was fortunate enough that during my kind of fourth and fifth year of studying, I actually worked there part-time for about a day and a half a week. It kind of flexed depending on workload at university. And again, that was continued mentoring, so that was a 2-year journey while I was still studying, great sounding board for advice and in university, and then continued to work there post part two. I was lucky enough to see 2 projects I'd worked on over that 3-year period move into completion. And funnily enough, it was in the education sector. It's Thomas Muir Primary School and Kinross Primary School. So that gave me my first kind of taste of, the real life of architecture, and I guess specifically the education sector. I think just with my experiences of moving to a new school building and seeing the impact that can have, it really kind of focused my mind on what I wanted to do as an architect and, take that personal experience of the tangible differences that architecture can make to people's lives and continue that through. But then I guess like everyone else, you want to spread your wings and move away. So me and my now fiance, who's actually from Northern Ireland, she's an interior designer, decided to pack up and move to London. And so, I'd had this experience in the education sector. It was something I was really interested in continuing to develop. So I started researching architectural practices who, specialised or done a lot of work in the education sector and came across ADP architecture. I was really fortunate at ADP that with my work as a part-time part two and then my kind of year post-graduation, I was able to take on probably a bit more responsibility than your average part two with 1 year's experience could take. It was a big step up personally and professionally doing that. It was a lot of pressure, a lot of stress, but looking back on it now, it was 100% worth it. And one of those projects that I embarked on was a new build secondary school in East London, Woolwich Polytechnic School for Girls. This was a tricky project. It was when I just started the ADP architecture, we won the job. And like what happens in London, people hit a certain age, they hit a certain ceiling and they leave. So, within about 2 months of me starting working at ADP, the project architect who was earmarked to deliver the scheme, I was still an assistant at the time, they left. And so did a couple of other project architects. So my directors come up to me and they said, look, you've got more experience than someone of your level. We'll give you all the support we can. How would you feel about taking on kind of project architect role? And yeah, jumped at it. It's jumping in at the deep end, but really worthwhile because you just learn so much working on a project of that size and that complexity at quite an early stage. Steep learning curve, definitely steep learning curve, but worth every minute. And then after that project was completed, during the construction, completed my part 3, and we moved on to working on university projects. So this was the University of Sussex Student Centre. So this is the first university project I'd worked on. It was within the kind of historic Basil Spence campus at University of Sussex. And Basil Spence is a name I'll be referencing again as we go through. It seems to be an architect who likes to follow me around different projects. But this was a totally different type of project. It was a new building typology for universities at the time. Student centres, common now, but when this was getting designed, it was quite a new idea. It's essentially the amalgamation of all the student-facing services into one building. It's not a study space, it's not a library. It's where your kind of registry, accommodation, student finance, and kind of, I guess, the pastoral care is housed. So that was a really interesting project because the client and the university themselves didn't actually know what they wanted to do. So we were involved from a really early stage of developing that brief with the client, visiting the few other student centres that were out there, and really getting a handle on what they wanted out of it, and how we could give them that. And thankfully, the project was a success, and it won multiple awards for retrofit and fit out design. And then the final project I worked on at ADP in London was Epsom College sixth form. So I'd worked on, the DFE secondary schools, worked on university student centres, and this was a completely different education typology again. This was Epsom College, a quite wealthy independent school. It was traditional contract, direct appointment, no framework. There was no DFE standard brief to follow. And they had completely different pedagogy and teaching styles and different project aims they wanted out of this. It was all about producing a product that was value for money, and really not in terms of construction, but in terms of the students and the pupils who attended, and really showcasing that the quite high fees they were paying were worth it. Completely different from the projects I'd done before. But again, it was really great to work that through with the client directly at a really early stage to try and work out exactly what they needed and how we could best deliver it for them. So then it came to about the end of 2019, and like I said, I think most people who've experienced living in London, you get a bit sick of living in a one-bed shoebox after a while, and we made the decision to leave London. So we'd obviously worked and lived in Glasgow for a while, but my fiance, she's from here, so we thought, why don't we try Belfast? That might be a good place to put down some roots, get a bit of kind of longer term stability, and try that out. So we made the decision in kind of late 2019. This is Epsom College, the Aberdeenshire. I wanted to make sure that we kind of left at a good line in the sand. So we kind of gave ourselves about 3 months notice so I could tie in with the end of stage 4. Now, when it came to kind of coming up with my CV and portfolio to apply for new places, as you can see in the presentation, it was so heavy education focused. And I was probably only qualified, 2 years at this time. But because of all the work I'd done part-time, I'd built up, a common theme of education projects. And, I really was conscious of pigeonholing myself into the education sector. So when we made the decision to leave London, I deliberately looked for a practice who'd done something completely different. Researched different practices in Belfast and Northern Ireland, and really liked the look of white ink architects. Accepted a job there at December 2019 with a view starting in March 2020. So my first day at White Ink was the 16th of March 2020, which was also the day the working from home was introduced. So that was good timing. It was a great place to work though, and it was obviously difficult circumstances for everyone involved, but really thankful for the experience that I had at White Ink. The image you can see here is Postmark. So it was a completely different building typology and sector. It was high density apartment living, new aims for projects, new difficulties with clients, new constraints to work within, a completely different environment to working within the education sector. Really thankful to have the opportunity to work in that environment. And I think it was enjoyable, but I think it's just the personal impact that I had from school years and university years that it didn't scratch the same itch that education projects did. Must have just been that personal tie between it. So I knew after maybe a year and a half that I wanted to try and get back into the education game. And that's when I came across White Ink, HLM Architect, sorry. So HLM were actually one of ADP's biggest competitors when I was in London. They worked in similar type of projects. They had a very similar business setup, regional offices that work across the regions with specialisms in different sectors. So I knew of the education experience and the education projects that HLM had worked on, and I was really keen to get involved whenever the opportunity arose. So yeah, I'm part of the education team here. At the Belfast studio, there's a mix of different specialities: in education, healthcare, justice, emergency services. The education team at HLM comprises of about 60 people with a core team of about 7, usually kind of rep from each studio, and I'm the Belfast rep for the education sector. We work, like I mentioned, across studios, so it's a great way to learn and kind of develop your own expertise in a sector that you're interested in. So I can glean experience and expertise from the Glasgow studio or the London studio or the Sheffield studio, and as a sector team we all contribute to the projects that each different region is working on. What we try to do, and I think we successfully do in a lot of projects, is pioneer new building techniques and teaching pedagogies. So within the education team, we've got a big focus on MMC, which is a whole presentation in itself, but it's utilising off-site construction to address what is the climate crisis. There's a new framework in London, the DFE, are really embracing 3D volumetric design, and it's working out to real success. And HLM are definitely leading the way in regards to MMC. But I've just got a couple of projects here that we've worked on across the business. This is the James McEwan Smith Learning Hub for the University of Glasgow. It's a mix of teaching and learning spaces, breakout spaces, study spaces. And again, learning and picking up the expertise from across the regions and being able to positively contribute to these projects is really ideal. We've got NMIS here, which is the National Manufacturing Institute for Scotland for the University of Strathclyde. And this is one of these projects that utilises that MMC construction. So we've got off-site produced glue lamp structure. There's 3D volumetric MMC construction with a CLT internal fit out. It's really kind of getting the institutions and universities to think further ahead than their immediate goals, think about the longer term implications, the carbon implications, and most of them are on board with it. I think everyone is now, and it's great to be involved in pushing these things forward. Just an external shot of NMIS there. And then finally across the business, we've got the WAVE, which is the social sciences building for the University of Sheffield. This was kind of trying to pioneer new teaching pedagogies and having more breakout space and informal learning rather than the more traditional classroom or lecture-based learning. So yeah, great to be involved and really pick up that expertise across the business. But focusing here on the Belfast team, we're a kind of close-knit team of about 14. And like I said, we work across multiple sectors. We've got healthcare, education, justice, emergency services. And within HLM, I kind of hold a number of different hats. So like I mentioned, MMC, I'm one of the MMC champions in HLM. So, try and pioneer this new way of working, a new way of construction, whether it be 2D offsite, panelized, or 3D volumetric design. I'm also one of HLM's design champions. So across all the regions that are covered, we sit on design reviews at a very early stage and try and steer and set the overall aims and ambitions for the project. Social outreach, which I'll come on to next in a bit more detail, but HLM is fully on board with social outreach, and that's something personally that I'm very keen on and quite passionate about, because I would say I'm probably a product of social outreach, and if it wasn't for that, I might not be here today talking to you guys. HLM is also an employee-owned business, so we've got an EOT voice hub where I also sit on that, and we kind of feed through the kind of aims or questions, queries, suggestions from the rest of the employees onto the board. And finally sit on the BIM steering group, so just making sure that our own kind of Revit and BIM processes and procedures are up to date with recent standards, and you guys all know about that. But social outreach, here in the Belfast studio, we really try and maximise as much social outreach as we can. Generally, that involves going to visit local primary schools and secondary schools in Belfast and the whole of Northern Ireland. I've got an image here of a recent visit that two of my colleagues carried out, Chris and Kerry. Now, Chris is a landscape architect and Kerry's an architect. So I think what we try and do is try and let the pupils know that, construction isn't just architecture. There's architecture, landscape architecture, interior design. There's also a finance and accounting side to the back of it. There's QS. There's also the on-site works. And it's just trying to enlighten the pupils to different career options and career paths. And like I said, it's not a token, here's a 2-hour presentation. It's trying to maintain and continue that relationship and provide that assistance as they go through. We hold portfolio evenings where we review potential students' applications to university. And it's something I'm really passionate about, because if it wasn't for me getting that when I was at a young age, like I said, I might not be here talking to you guys today. And I think as architects, we need to be aware of the next generation and make sure that we guide them through in the right way. But just the little image here is a good example of what we try and do. So, Kerry goes and she constructs the biodome as the architect with the pupils. And Chris, as the landscape architect, gets the kids involved in different biomes across the world. So whether that be a rainforest, desert, tundra, and it's the amalgamation of those two disciplines within architecture that creates a little biodome for the kids. And, they get involved, they get excited, and, maybe there's a few future architects that have come out of that visit. And then just a bit of a kind of stopgap on the work that we are doing here in education in Northern Ireland and the island of Ireland. So one of the projects we're working on just now is Newbridge Integrated College. We're partnered with Ganson, the contractor, to deliver this scheme on site. It's on site just now, the steel frame's up, the slabs are in, and it's full steam ahead. But I guess tying these things together, we've been into the school probably twice in the last year now to deliver different social outreach presentations, different workshops. And we're also planning a site walk round with some people who have identified that they would be interested in a career in architecture. And funnily enough, there's a pupil who'd left Newbridge last year. She's working now, she's studying at college, and she's interested in applying to architecture. So the school have actually got in touch with ourselves, and I've been kind of going out at our engagement meetings with the school, talking to the prospective architecture student about generating a portfolio, preparing for interview questions, the whole lot. And I think it's just something we have to do. And then we've also recently developed a bit of a relationship with UCD. So this ties into another one of HLM and probably myself, and I guess everyone in the call's aspirations and kind of worries in regards to the climate crisis. What we're doing at UCD is we're doing a number of things. One is an initial space planning review. So with the obvious climate crisis on board, we always take a retrofit first approach to anything that we try and do. What UCD are looking to do now is a wholesale review of their campus and their estate and their assets. And what we're finding is this is happening across universities across the UK. We've carried out a number of these studies for University of Sheffield, University of Glasgow, Strathclyde, Leahy in London. We've carried out a number of these space planning reviews. And it's really to try and make sure that the projected growth numbers in the universities, the current buildings, can either accommodate it as they are, or recommend a series of changes or internal adaptations to suit that projected growth. Now, the growth numbers across universities in the next 10 years is going to skyrocket pretty much across the board. And what we want to do is to make sure that there isn't a wholesale demolition and rebuild, or unnecessarily rebuilding when they don't have to. Because what you find in a lot of university buildings is, poor utilisation rate, poor condition, poor efficiency of space. And what we do in these reviews is visit the universities, assess the building condition, and then assess the building use. So is it efficient? Is it utilising space well? How could the internal layouts be arranged to accommodate different ways of teaching and different ways of working? And what that does is it allows the universities to adapt their current assets to deal with that projected growth numbers. If there's a need to extend, there is a need to new build, there is a need, you can't get away from it. But what we're trying to do is minimise that rebuild as much as we can and retrofit first. Similarly, we're working with UCD on the James Joyce Library, which is another Basil Spence building. So told you to be mentioned again. But it's the same idea. But UCD have the James Joyce Library, which has had interventions over the last 20 years. You can see in the image here, it's an amazing concrete brutalist structure, big waffle slab ceilings that are, really, really impressive as you walk through. What they're looking to do is same idea. It's not been touched in the last 20, 30 years. The interior fit out is pretty much the same as it was when it was first built. The arrangement of the spaces, both study spaces and library spaces, has just been kind of ad hocly manipulated to suit their kind of immediate needs at that time. And what we're kind of doing is a wholesale retrofit to bring the internals and some of the externals up to kind of modern day standards and make sure that they've got a teaching facility that's really fit for purpose. Similarly, there's a UNESCO accredited heritage collections at UCD. So in the island of Ireland, there's only 2 UNESCO heritage items. One is the Book of Kells at Trinity, which I'm sure everyone knows about and has heard of. The second is the National Folklore Collection at UCD, which doesn't get as much publicity. So as part of this library renovation, we're also curating and moving the National Folklore Collection into the library to really celebrate that and give UCD some of its own identity and really bring the significance of the James Joyce Library and the National Folklore Collection together. Similarly, the building next door to the library is the Newman Building. This is I guess, arts, humanities, and social sciences. It's the same Basil Spence design, really, brutalist concrete architecture. And it's the same job, we're retrofitting the inside, we're bringing up to modern day teaching and staffing standards. We're reviewing how they currently use the space, how their current staffing levels work, their ways of working. The introduction of hybrid working has totally changed the way that university academics work, and it's changed the way they teach. So it's not just a facelift internally, it's really revisiting how they teach and how they work and adapting and modernising their pedagogy style. Part of this project as well is pretty interesting. It's developing the external concourse. You can see the top image there is this concrete waffle slab external walkway. And what we're trying to do is unify the buildings on campus. So making that link back to the library, making a link back to the new developments that they have in campus, and really developing that external concourse to complement the brutalist architecture style that they have. And then just to wrap up, looking at the future and how this journey that I've had since, I moved into that new school building back in the day and to where I am now, it's really a number of things. I think as architects, I mentioned the climate crisis and approach to retrofit first. I think we pretty much in this call, we would all agree that's what we have to do, and it has to be the focus of our thinking when it comes to architecture. And part of that, like I mentioned, is MMC. Now, if I had to go in and talk about MMC, that would be a whole other presentation. But the savings and the impact it makes on embodied carbon is huge. And it's something we are really pioneering and trying to develop and make a focus. We've got the DFE framework in England. Is there a way we could get an MMC framework in production over here? Because the savings and the impact it has on the carbon emissions are huge. When it comes to our actual teaching methods in Northern Ireland, we all have experience from all over the globe working in different education projects. All of us on this call have all had different experiences of different universities, different school experiences. And I think we need to, as architects, we have a view of the entire building and what goes on inside that building. And I think we really need to push for innovation within those teaching styles. We have the Denny Handbook here for new school development. I think as architects, we can push to upgrade that and push for innovation and new ways of teaching so that the next pupils coming through are getting the best chance and the best experience that they have. And then finally, talking about widening access to architecture. Now, I mentioned at the very start, yes, it was great that I had that mentoring experience when we moved into the new school facility, but that's total luck of the draw. That was right time, right place. Years later, I might not have got that. And I think we really need to be careful that we don't close the access to architecture. There's obviously issues around tuition fees, the cost of tuition fees and the length of the course. And there's been lots of chat from the ARB and the RIBA about part 1, part 2, part 3 and what we do with this. And I think we really need to try as much as we can to widen access to architecture, whether that be through apprenticeships. So I know there's working on within the Education Committee just now looking at the viability of apprenticeships within Northern Ireland. They've been a huge success in the UK. HLM are one of the trailblazers in actually introducing these apprenticeships within the UK. So is that something we can do in Northern Ireland? Is that going to widen access to architecture? And then similarly, the next two are kind of one and the same. I think, embedded mentoring. So, everyone's worked in practices where you're given a mentor and you have your regular catch-ups. But I think what really has to happen is long-term relationships to be established. And that's going to take time. It's going to take the right person, but we can all do it. It doesn't take a lot of time. It takes an hour every couple of months to have a bit of a catch-up and make sure, whether it's part 1s, part 2s, or recent part 3s, are comfortable, they're getting the experience they want, are on the right track, and it doesn't leave. That relationship doesn't end if they leave and walk out the door. I think it's establishing those long-term commitments and long-term goals and long-term relationships with each other. Again, I was fortunate enough that the architects I knew when I was younger had done that with me. And if it wasn't for that, like I said, I might not be here today. So yeah, that's where I think we have to be going. And I think that pretty much concludes the presentation there. If anyone's got any questions or anything, more than happy to answer.
Thank you, Felix. That was wonderful. It was unusual in that you spoke about your early sort of career and how you became an architect and the impact of the architect coming to your school in Glasgow.
Yeah.
And it would seem that you've now